Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're digging into one of the most famous American origin stories ever told. You know, the one that gets packaged as a sweet romance, a heroic rescue, and a moment of perfect harmony between two worlds. But once you zoom out, that story starts to change shape. Because when most people say Pocahontas, they're usually talking about a legend. And the real person behind that legend lived a life that was far more political, complicated, and ultimately heartbreaking than any fairy tale version. So, let's untangle the myth from the reality. First, let's do a quick reality check. Pocahontas wasn't even her real name. Her personal name, the one used within her community, was Matoaka. Pocahontas was more of a nickname, something like playful one or mischievous one, and it was the name that stuck with the English writers who told her story. She was a member of the powerful Powhatan Confederacy in the coastal region of Virginia, the very place where the English founded Jamestown in 1607. And that detail is crucial. Jamestown wasn't some cute little village dropped into an empty forest. It was a risky, desperate experiment plopped down in the middle of a land where established nations already existed. These nations had their own leaders, their own complex alliances, their own rules, and their own political strategies. The English newcomers, by contrast, were dangerously vulnerable. They were constantly short on food. They didn't understand the land or its seasons. And they certainly didn't understand the intricate politics of the world they had just entered. Meanwhile, the Powhatan Confederacy, led by Pocahontas' father, Wahensanok, was watching all of this very carefully, trying to figure out exactly what these strangers were, what they wanted, and just how dangerous they might become. Now, enter Captain John Smith. Years after the fact, Smith tells this incredibly dramatic story. He claims he was captured, brought before Wahensanok, and was about to be executed when, at the very last second, Pocahontas threw herself over him, saving his life. This is a scene everyone remembers. It's cinematic, it's emotional, and it's incredibly easy to retell. The problem is, historians have been arguing about this story for centuries. Why? Because in his earliest writings from Virginia, Smith doesn't clearly describe this dramatic rescue the way we imagine it. He only added the full, sensational details much later, long after Pocahontas had become famous in England. And that suspicious timing makes a lot of people think he might have embellished the truth. So what might have actually happened? One strong possibility is that Smith simply misunderstood a cultural ritual. What he perceived as an execution and a last-second rescue might have actually been a political performance. It could have been a symbolic adoption ceremony, a staged moment meant to send a powerful message to the English. You are not being destroyed, but you are being placed into a new relationship with us under our rules and on our terms. Another possibility is that Smith polished the story over time because it made him look like a heroic adventurer and made the entire colony's beginning feel more dramatic, meaningful, and even divinely ordained. And here's the most important point. Even if some version of that event did happen, it was almost certainly not about romance. Pocahontas was very young at the time, maybe only 10 or 11 years old. The Disney-style love story between a grown man and a young girl is a complete modern invention. It's a fantasy, not a reliable window into what was actually happening between these two very different worlds. So, if the big heroic rescue is shaky at best, what do we know is real? We do know that, in the early years, Pocahontas acted as a kind of connection point. English accounts describe her visiting the Jamestown settlement, sometimes bringing food. Later writers portrayed her as an intermediary who helped with communication and eased tensions during a time when both sides were constantly testing each other's boundaries. But this help wasn't a magic peace spell from a kind-hearted princess. It was fragile, high-stakes diplomacy in an incredibly dangerous situation. Because here's the part the myth conveniently skips over. The relationship between the English settlers and the Powhatan people did not move in a straight line from conflict to friendship. It was a messy, chaotic back and forth of negotiation, pressure, violent clashes, misunderstandings, and shifting power dynamics. The English desperately needed food and stability to survive. The Powhatan leaders needed to control the risk these newcomers posed and protect their people and their land. Both sides were constantly making strategic calculations. Nobody was living in a musical. Then, the story takes a much darker turn. After being injured in a gunpowder explosion, John Smith left Virginia and returned to England. For a while, Pocahontas had no contact with him. Some accounts even suggest she was told that Smith had died. Whether that detail is perfectly accurate or not, the bigger reality is this: the supposed friendship or romance from the legend didn't continue. The situation on the ground in Virginia was changing fast, and it was getting far more tense and violent. Then, in 1613, the story shifts from diplomacy to coercion. Pocahontas was captured by the English and held hostage. They used her as a bargaining chip in their tense negotiations with her father and the Powhatan leadership. This is not a fairy tale. This is a raw exercise of power. During her captivity, she was taught English customs, instructed in Christianity, and eventually baptized, taking the new name Rebecca. A year later, she married John Rolfe, an English colonist who was instrumental in developing Virginia's lucrative tobacco economy. And this is where her story becomes undeniably political. The English didn't just see her marriage as a personal union. They saw it as proof. Proof that their colonial project was righteous. Proof that they could civilize and convert the native people. Proof that their presence in this new land had a higher, moral purpose. Pocahontas became a living, breathing advertisement for the Virginia Company. To capitalize on this, she, her husband, and their young son were taken to England. There, she was presented to high society, including King James I, as a symbol of the colony's success. She was a diplomatic showpiece, a tame princess from the New World. Her image was used to sell the idea that colonization could be a peaceful, mutually beneficial process, even while the actual situation back in Virginia was spiraling toward even deeper conflict and war. While in England, she had one last, fateful encounter. She met John Smith again. Accounts of that meeting describe it as emotionally fraught and complicated. It was not a romantic reunion. It was more like a collision between the story Smith had been telling about her and the difficult life she was actually living. Not long after, before she could return to her homeland, Pocahontas became seriously ill. She passed away in England in 1617, still tragically young. So, when you ask, was the story of Pocahontas a love story or APR legend? The uncomfortable answer is that the famous version we all know is almost entirely a public relations machine. It has a story that was shaped and polished to make the brutal realities of colonization feel softer, to make a violent beginning feel friendly, to give people a simple character they could root for without having to think too hard about what was happening to real people and real communities in real time. And that's why this myth keeps coming back, generation after generation. Because nations love simple, heroic origin stories that feel innocent. We love a beginning that looks like destiny, friendship, and happy misunderstandings that all get resolved in the end. It's so much emotionally easier than the truth, which is that history is often built on unequal power, competing survival strategies, and narratives written by whoever holds the pen. So, the real takeaway from the life of Matawaka, known as Pocahontas, isn't about a forbidden romance. It is something much sharper And more important, her story shows us how quickly a real person with a complex life can be turned into a simple symbol. And it shows how those symbols can be weaponized to justify decisions that shape the future of entire continents. The next time you hear someone say, Pocahontas saved John Smith, don't just picture a scene from a movie. Picture a tense political borderland where every single interaction had life or death stakes. And where the version of the story that survives is often the version that was most useful to the people in power. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories we think we know. See you next time.